Hello, this is my actual first time on a YouTube video. I posted one earlier, but I wasn't on YouTube, and I'm not even sure how it all works. Again, when you're attempting something for the first time, I'm reminded of what I heard a while back. You have fear of failure, fear of success, and fear of judgment. So I've got all those fears operating right now, but I'm just going to let it rip and see what happens and see where it's supposed to go and how it's supposed to help somebody. But this hopefully is the beginning of many videos that I will be posting in the future, depending on the need of the hour and depending on how beneficial this one is, I guess. And we'll see what happens. But I want to tell my faith story in response to a question I've heard many, many years ago, that if God is all loving, he would stop all suffering. And if he was all powerful, he could stop it. So why doesn't he? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. My background, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm in my office here in Alpharetta, Georgia. I've written 3 books, and I'm going to talk about them in the end. And you can access them if you choose on Amazon, but I've written 3 books. I have a master's in religion. I have a master's in counseling, and I have a specialization in mental health. So I've been in practice since 2012 and building a practice through counseling individuals, couples, and families. So where did it all begin? It began in upstate New York, where I'm from. A little town called Camillus, New York, right outside Syracuse. And for the first 15 years of my life, middle class, dad was a salesman, mom was a stay-at-home mom until she got on board with the work world and worked for the bank and then became an assistant at a school. So she left the house when I was probably about 9. I still have attachment issues as a result of that. But the bottom line is she did that. And so it was a middle class environment. We went to church sporadically. I was not really guided in any kind of church doctrine or church dogma, church anything really. And so I grew up with the knowledge that potentially it was out there, but had no relevance whatsoever to my personal life. So for the first 15 years of my life, I was pretty much, the average American boy, you would say. And I was involved in sports. Hockey was my biggest sport. I played since I was 9 years old, and I was played through high school, and it was the main sport that I kind of latched onto and continued. And so, but at 15, I began to, like many people, many young people, experiment with drugs and alcohol. And I got the feeling during the 60s, 70s actually, and all of the turmoil that was happening during that season made me question and doubt really what life was all about. And I developed this kind of like cynical attitude towards life. And I thought to myself, life is not really worth living. And I began to think, what's the point? And I began to basically act that way and operate that way. And I had pretty much a bad attitude. And so I was with friends that, like I always tell clients, friends are like elevators. They can take you up or they can take you down. So these friends kind of took me down. And one night I was arrested for stealing. We were stealing alcohol and beer at the local grocery store. I was arrested. And this was when I was about 17 years old. And I stood before the judge, and the judge said, since you're going to go into the Air Force, because that's what I kind of was deciding to do at that time, I'm going to let you, I'm going to cut you some slack. But if I see you here again, basically I'm going to throw you the book at you. So I thought to myself, yeah, I better lay low, and I did sort of. But one night I was on my motorcycle, and I was at a field days fair up the street, and this friend of mine said, "Can you give me a ride home?" I was on my motorcycle, and I gave him a ride home on my motorcycle, and on my way back, I saw these yellow lights, or red lights, and yellow lights behind me, and I thought, "Oh my gosh!" And I had been drinking, and I didn't realize I was really that drunk, but. um, Got off the bike, almost fell over. He put the tests on me, failed all those tests, ended up at the police station. And that was the beginning of kind of my awakening. I, um, I started to think I was in a lot of trouble. And my sister and her boyfriend at the time had become believers, Christians. And I remember going to one of their studies, and they were talking about Jesus. And I thought, well, what's that might be all well and good, but what does it have to do with me? What does it have to do with my personal life? So this back and forth occurred for a season, and then I finally was on the roof of my house. They were doing some construction on my house, my parents' house, and I was looking at the stars, and I said to myself, and I said to what I didn't know that there was any deity or any God or whatever. And I said, Lord, if you're up there, if you're up there, you can help me. Please help me. That's all I said. So long story short, I stood before the same judge. Thought I was good. I had 5 tickets: DWI, driving while intoxicated, speeding, and 3 other more minor charges. And the judge says, I'm going to give you a reduced sentence on this DWAI, ability impaired, and I'm going to give you a $25 fine. I left the courthouse and something had changed. I felt at that moment that, man, God had answered my prayer. But that was the beginning of something that started to awaken within me. And what was awakening within me was a call that I heard, a call from God ultimately to follow. And there was another call inside me that said, no, I don't want to do that. And this went back and forth for about a month. And I was at a rock and roll concert in Buffalo, New York. And I was so troubled inside because part of me wanted to go in the direction and a big part of me did not want to go. And I was trying to drown out all the feelings with drugs. And I was hallucinating, and I was seeing things that weren't there. I was looking at my blue sneakers and they were turning green and going like this. And I thought to myself, this must be the judgment. This is the judgment of God against me for what I'm doing here. He's here. He helped me out, and this is what I'm doing in return, and I'm not following. And I honestly, looking back, it sounds a little bit elementary, but this was a real strong experience at the time. And I honestly thought I was going to go to hell in that condition. And I went home and I woke up that morning in my right mind. And at that point, I was like, okay, if you would forgive me, that's all I said is, if you would forgive me, I will surrender. I'll give it all. I'm not going to make my own decisions anymore. I'm not going to fight you anymore. And at that moment, John Wesley talked about how his heart was strangely warmed. And I can say that that's kind of what happened to me. I felt the strange warmness. And I knew I was in. And I knew I was forgiven. And I knew things were going to change from that point. And they did. I ended up in the university, Syracuse University campus at a discipleship program for the couple of years. I went on to Bible college because somebody told me or asked me the question. One of my friends asked me the question. They said, "How do you know that what your experience is the real Jesus?" And I thought to myself, I know I've had this experience, and I know and believe that God exists, but how do I know that the Bible is actually true? And so that put me on a quest to go to study it. Studied it for 5 years, and then I ended up with a master's in religion because I wanted to see all different parts and different faiths, perspectives, etc. And and I did. And I was married in 1986, had 2 children, and I was involved in my church, and I was teaching and training and doing all kinds of things in association with that, because the more I read, the more I studied, the more I looked at the scriptures themselves, the more I became convinced that what I was believing was absolutely true, and that Jesus was who he said he was, and that there is a meaning, and that there is a purpose, and there's a reason for our existence. And I honestly believe that if I just would follow him, that I would end up in the fullness of what I was meant to do and was meant to be. And everything was going fine, and through the years you get a sense, maybe it's not like taught, but it's caught, that certain things are true. And one of the things that I think I subconsciously bought into was this idea that if you're in, if you're with the Almighty, that He's going to protect you from all things. And if you hear some ministers, you get the impression that if you check the box, you're in, nothing bad is going to happen. And even though I didn't fully embrace that, I guess, being honest, that was in my thinking to a certain extent. I go into more detail in this book, Walking This Walk. It's my first book. The bottom line is, in April of 2002, after I just moved into a home and living, quote, the American dream, working, taking care of my family, left work on a Friday night about 6:30. And on my way home from work, I stopped at the Kroger. My wife had asked me to get some sauce, so I did. Came out of the Kroger, got in my two-door Blazer, and put on the seatbelt. Last thing I do remember is doing that. Started driving up Baldwin Road, which was Michigan at the time, and was struck head on by a drunk driver. This woman who had been driving with her 4 children in the back seat, she hit me head on. I have no memory of the crash. I had multiple vertebrae fractures, multiple rib fractures. I had a closed head injury. I was in a coma for a week. And the worst part of my injury was a spinal cord injury. If you know much about human anatomy, you know that the brain, the sending unit, sends the signal down through the cord, and the nerves operate from that central nervous system and operate the rest of your body. So at the T8, thoracic 8, which is belly button, it's a little notch you can see on the MRI, and that little notch on the cord holds up all of the nerve flow. So from the waist down, I was paralyzed, and I am paralyzed to this day. I had made a determination to beat it, and I'm still trying to beat it, to be quite honest. I do therapy like 4 days a week. I've got stem therapy on my legs, and I've not given up the dream of one day in this life walking again. But I say all of that to say that just because you have faith doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. And just because you believe it's not a magic pill. Scripture says that without faith, it's impossible to please God. First, a man must believe God is, and that God is a rewarder of those who seek him. There's a story in the New Testament where Jesus talks to Peter and he said, Peter, he said, Satan. And scripture talks about Satan as the God of this age, he's the controlling influencer of this age. It says Satan is demanded to sift you like wheat. I'm not sure what that all means, but it doesn't sound very good to me. Satan is demanded to sift you like wheat. He said, I prayed that your faith might not fail. James, the brother of Jesus, wrote in the New Testament, and he said, count it all joy when you encounter trials of many kinds. Why? Because the testing of your faith produces something, patience. It produces character. Paul the Apostle said, suffering with perseverance brings about proven character and hope. So if you've bought into the lie that all is supposed to be well just because you believe, I hope that my story kind of counters that and encourages you to realize that if you're going through hell, and this is just one part, my physical issues are just one part of any kind of a test. Your test might be completely different. The bottom line is faith is established because of who God is in his character and in his being. George Mueller, one of the great faith people of the 1800s, he said, never be satisfied until you can say in the depths of your heart that God is an infinitely wonderful being. And so no matter what you're going through, it's safe to trust the Almighty, and it's right to love him. Dealing with clients that have mental health challenges, some believe and some don't believe. But the ones that believe tend to get better quicker. Not that you can't get better without faith. You can. You have to have a renewed way of looking at the world. But I encourage many of you who do, or the ones that maybe have lost, to remember what the scripture says, that faith is the substance. Faith is the substance. It has substance, and it will carry you from point A to point B. No matter what you're going through, it's safe to trust him. So, the first book I wrote tells my story that I just told in more detail. I just scanned the surface, but this is Walking This Walk. It's on Amazon, and it's reasonably priced, etc. The second book I wrote it's called Faith for Modern Times, and it's about 4 patriarchs in the Old Testament and their journey of faith, and their recognition that, our recognition from reading that it wasn't all hunky-dory for them either. And then the latest and last is Walking This Walk and Beyond. And I felt like I needed to continue to tell my story regarding my faith journey since the accident, or since the crash. And some of the things that I've learned along my way. I have a chapter here about my marriage, which thankfully still married and still in love, actually. And no matter what happens in your life, when you have somebody that loves you and cares about you and is willing to support you, it makes all the difference. People say, well, how did you get through? I said, well, faith, family, and friends, in that order. Faith, family, and friends. And my wife, my biggest cheerleader. Without her, I would be talking to you today. So if you don't have somebody in your world like that, I hope you can find somebody that will help you. If you're in the Georgia area, if you're in Michigan and you need mental health services, um, give me a call. I hope this helps you, and I hope you benefit from it. And not even how, not even sure how to turn this thing off, but hopefully we can talk soon.